Thanks so much for this invitation. We started talking about this quite a while ago, so glad to finally be with you. Um, I want to share just a snapshot of some of the work that I do and talk a bit about my journey to Florida and building a lab and um, just how we do things a bit differently in terms of our process. And personally, just how I've got involved a lot in, although I come from a design background, got really involved in communication and writing and storytelling and public education through my work. So let me give just a maybe a lot of bits and pieces from my career to think about, and then hopefully we can discuss at the end. I hope it'll be interesting for you all. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself to get started. Oh no, it's going to come up in pieces. I want it all to come up at once. Anyway, um, so I was born in Chicago actually, and spent my early years in Chicago, but moved to Dublin, Ireland, when I was 8 years old. Grew up in Dublin, and always wanted to be an architect from like age of about 10. Always drawing buildings and building things. And so I went up to Belfast, which was a couple hours away from Dublin, to train as an architect. Went to Queen's University Belfast, um, and did my undergrad, started working for a firm there, and then went back to school for my master's right after Katrina, so like the month after. And we had to find a thesis topic. And of course, that was like top of mind for me, being from the States and just talking with folks back here. And so I got in touch with a advisor that was really interested in hazards and buildings, and settled on doing the research project on Katrina. So I spent time back here, did a road trip on the Gulf Coast, did building surveys, was really like focused on the design aspect of this and just how structures failed, how materials, you know, fared from depending on what hazard they were facing. Um, but also, of course, got talking to people. And that was kind of the start of the journey for me of really understanding what's going on with the creation of risk in society, and started to challenge things I assumed about disasters being very much about the hazard, and put me on this pathway towards being a social scientist of risk, and um, very much focusing on how inequalities and injustices in our societies surface during disasters, rather than are created by the hazards, right? So anyway, that led me into a different career than I thought, right? So I started getting really into the research aspect, learning research skills. By the time I did finish my architecture grad school, I was like, yeah, I want to be a researcher rather than go back into the design firm. And so I did a PhD at Queen's as well. And that took me more into construction management because I was looking at post-disaster reconstruction. And so, yeah, and that's taken me to Australia to build a disaster group at the University of Newcastle. And then I saw this recruitment at UF, which was for a cluster hire in resilience. And of course, that caught my attention. And I was fortunate enough to be brought over to Florida, and have been involved in Florida Institute for Built Environment Resilience since its inception. Now been here 6 years. And anyway, that's kind of a brief overview of how I ended up here. I work a lot in Florida because my work is very community centered, relies on relationships, and that takes time. And so at Fiber, we focus on certain places in Florida where we grow our network and our just the ability to do sensitive work um, with people that are already there and already, you know, the experts on the place that they live. And so that's kind of how we work. I do a lot of work in Jacksonville and Cedar Key at the moment in Florida, and have been fortunate enough to collaborate with lots of people on grants, on scholarship. I really love to write, and I want to talk about that today. I love to read. Um, we have an upcoming book. I don't know if any of you all are authors in our book. I think so. Harmon, you're an author in our book, right? So I'm so excited about our book that's coming out. Um, something super different. So I'll mention that as we go on. But it's a book basically asking disaster related researchers to reflect on thinkers, philosophers that inspire their work that are not necessarily like in the canon of disaster um, theorists, right? So thinkers from outside of our canon that inspire. And so it's a super cool list of essays, and we're very excited to bring that to everybody by next year. Um, and yeah, I get involved in all sorts of public education stuff. Um, right now, it's kind of tricky, a period where academic voices are kind of being silenced in different ways. And so, like for instance, this hurricane season has been it's been hard to kind of say what we know is going on when journalists come to talk or come to try to write a story in Florida, because you immediately are subject to being attacked for that afterwards. So I want to talk about reading outside our field. So this relates to the book that we're putting together. I should have brought a list of the table of contents, but anyway, it's a cool table of contents of just I had no idea the range of thinkers that inspired disaster research. It's incredible. What who people are reading. It's super cool. We all come from different traditions and disciplines, and so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. But it's really going to be cool to release this book. This is some of the stuff that I love to read. I try to integrate lots of theory that goes into ecologies, goes into kind of post-development literature, spans across kind of psychology and sociology and history, with a big focus on authors that are writing from a perspective of people that have been oppressed, right? And so, because I think that's at the root of how disaster risk is created unevenly in our societies. And so all of this kind of literature is foundational for how I understand risk. Sometimes it looks like I'm reading stuff that's like way outside my field, but I'm like, no, it's so connected. So I want to talk about some of the research I've been doing and, and about public education in the next while. So this is like my most cited paper is like, it's a weird one because me and my colleagues started just talking about this. This has been the idea of natural disaster has been discussed to death, and lots of important papers over the years, all kind of sometimes saying like it's just a misnomer, it's just not an accurate description, but also getting to the political utility of using the phrase to
मीटिंग है ऐसी
Can we have everyone make sure that you're muted? Interrupting our speaker. Thanks so much.
It's all good. So like, so there's a political utility to this. You hear natural disaster used to mask over like fault for risk creation or responsibility for things that people that are harmed. And so we started looking into this, and it's certainly my most cited paper. If you want to look at metrics, it kind of was a popular idea. There's this whole no natural disaster campaign that happened that stemmed from this paper that we didn't organize or anything. And there's people, you might see them at conferences wearing no natural disaster badges and things. Um, anyway, we looked into this in a systematic way in the literature and tried to find like what is going on here. Is it really something that's like intentional or trying to mask over, blame, all of these things? And we found there's been this huge increase of usage, but most of it was just leveraging popularity. It just kind of when something becomes popular and it's getting published, people start to use it without really overthinking like why they're using it. They're just using the most popular language that's going to get published, that's going to be expected in a paper at that time. And we found some people were critiquing the usage of the word. That were kind of brought me. It brought me and others to start to think a bit more deeply about what's going on here. Um, Not so much because we wanted to like police language, but just how is language actually influencing the decisions that we make, how we perceive risk, all of this stuff. And so I started work with colleagues in psychology at UF to design experiments to start to unpack, like try to analyze where this language around natural disaster is actually influencing people in how they perceive an event. And we created some experiments to start to analyze this. So some cool papers came out of that with our psychology colleagues. And we also were able to get funding to start a lab and hire a postdoc. And so we had a whole series of proposals and papers and work that happened and relationships that were built out of this collaboration with the School of Psychology at UF. Did some photo voice work at Port St. Joe. We actually have a new photo voice project happening in Jacksonville. Lots of some cool work about formidability. We did an experiment where we were looking at climate change attitudes based on on physical attributes of the participants. I thought that was pretty cool work. Yeah, implicit attitudes. Colin Smith, who's now in Canada, but he was my initial collaborator here, is one of the global experts on implicit bias, and so we did some cool experiments around bias as well, and it just allowed us to kind of expand that scope of what we were interested in terms of disasters and how we understood risk. Again, this was kind of another spin-off of that work, was to start connecting with linguists as well to look at translation. And so this is a cool paper. I don't have the reference right here, but we have a paper about translation that I think is super cool, where we looked at key disaster terminology and kind of translated back and forth in dozens of different languages, using kind of crowdsourcing the information from disaster researchers around the world. And we looked at what happens when we translate from the Anglophone to other languages, and what happens when we're kind of looking for an English translation of how people understand disaster concepts in other language. And as you might not be surprised to hear, when we're translating out of English, or the tendency is to try to preserve the meaning of the Anglophone. And in the other direction, the preference is towards the Anglophone reader rather than preserving the meaning of the text. So again, we were kind of uncovering through an analysis of translation of disaster concepts this yeah, just this kind of neo-colonial enterprise of translation. And so, but a lot of this work then we're doing this kind of theory work around translation, but a lot of it is then applied in very local context. So for me, that's places near where I am, where I can actually spend time with people and have a reciprocal relationship in our lives, like entwine our lives, because I think that's important if you're going to be studying a place or uh, trying to solve local problems with local people. And so Jacksonville is a place where I work all the time. We actually just got a quite a large NSF grant to continue our work in Jacksonville on housing and air quality. Um, and that current the current award was started a few years ago with an award from Florida Sea Grant and NOAA, which was kind of a novel thing for them because we proposed to do participatory action research that was very messy and uncertain. And so we were really happy that the reviewers took the time to have that conversation with us rather than just being like, no, we can't do this. So we had a conversation about PAR and how that was actually a really healthy way to engage this community. And so we approached it from this perspective of just trying to develop a schedule of PAR cycles that would investigate spatial justice without really any certain research questions or outcomes. And we were able to get funding for that. So there is hope for that kind of work, honestly, even in funding spaces. Um, so we started working with the community in Health Zone 1 in Jacksonville. We were looking at just broadly spatial justice, and we ended up settling on the main issues that were affecting the people we were working with, which were around health and housing quality. And so we've been developing work there for several years, and it's gone right through. And Harmon knows this. We work on policy stuff with NHERI, so that work has developed into policy briefs for the local government. We had a meeting at City Hall last month just to talk about how to actually get this into um, interventions and budget line items for the city government. Mostly around like filter replacement, HVAC upgrades, smoking cessation education, those kind of recommendations. And in all of this work that's like locally situated, this is the kind of stuff that we're interested in prioritizing in the thinking, in the conception of the research. And this stems back to I don't know if you all are aware or signatories of the Disaster Studies Manifesto and the Accord. If anybody is aware of those documents. So if not, I can post a link later on. But those were like co-developed documents that were created by disaster researchers around the world that were all about the ethics of doing disaster research and kind of a way to check yourself when you're engaging in any sort of work with a community that has often been extracted from and has been oppressed, and you're working across teams with huge power differentials. And so I think those documents are really cool to just to reflect on your own practice. Anyway, some of these questions are very reflective of the Disaster Studies Manifesto. Thinking about who's doing the work, what are your questions, who's the funding benefiting, and like at what stage of the research process are people who live in the place, who are experts about a place, able to engage? Do you actually have a reciprocal relationship with them, or are you just ticking a box about engagement? And then thinking into the details about language translation, data sharing, dissemination, all of it grounded in kind of respect and reciprocity. So is it extractive? A lot of, I think a lot of funders are at some level looking for this, but sometimes the deeper level is your own self-reflection and being realistic about what you're doing. Because it's kind of it's sometimes not too hard to tick a box that you're being participatory, you're having engagement, but the deeper level is about your real commitment to people in the community, right? When do you want me to finish, Armin? What's a good
Around
10 minutes?
12:45.
10 minutes, okay?
Yeah, 10,
Okay,
10:15, yeah.
thank you. So I want to talk now just a little bit about research philosophy and how it shapes your approach. We had a defense a few days ago, and this was a really interesting part of the discussion in this defense in geography department. And the student was proposing very different types of studies and doing a PhD by publication, but the the studies all like two of the studies were super technical, and the third one was photo voice and very much about the community taking the lead in interpretation of and storytelling. And so we had this great discussion about research philosophy because in that kind of a proposal, you're blending very different research methods that almost need you to approach them a little bit differently philosophically. And so talking about whether you can maintain one philosophical lens and have very different methods and methodologies that emerge was interesting because ultimately it's about your where you land on scales of objectivity to subjectivity with regards to what is truth and how do we collect evidence, how do we prove something, or do we need to? And so in disaster studies, I would say and we've written about this in terms of, we wrote a paper about, the idea of reviewer two. Some of you have probably gone through peer review already. So you always get this reviewer who doesn't have any idea what you're doing, and just gives you ridiculous comments. And so we wrote about this as kind of a disaster studies problem because we have people from all different traditions that have different philosophical positions. And so you might get a reviewer that really disagrees with you fundamentally about reality, about about our existence. And so it's very hard for them to understand why you designed a project the way you did or why you analyzed findings the way that you did. So in our field, I would say it's kind of this post-positivist perspective and critical science or interpretive perspective. So approaches to research on disasters, I think, often differ across those kind of lines. And then when you're in interdisciplinary disaster teams, sometimes you just have a disagreement about your methodology or the tools that you're using. But I think it's great to go deeper into this conversation about your underlying philosophy to try to get together and figure out maybe there's different parts of a project that different people should work on because it's a better fit with the way that they see the world, I know about all of you in the programs that you're in, about how deep you go into philosophy of research. A few years ago, I redesigned our theory course at UF for doctoral core and introduced spending lots of time on theory and reading text and understanding all the different ways that you can come at research. And so there's lots of ways to categorize this. Many books have been written. I'm sure lots of you have read those books. But so when I come to disaster questions and problems. Uh, uh, I basically don't try to say like my research is value free. I actually approach it with a change agenda and say things are not the way that they should be. And I don't try to claim objectivity. That's the main thing that I make clear when I approach research. And some people come up in traditions where that's like, no, you can't do that, you know? And it's kind of framed in your literature or in your training as a big no-no. It really, and so that kind of illustrates the great diversity we have in people that study hazards and disasters. So I'll quickly talk about this. This has been a big focus of like my last 5 or so years is around theory building, is especially around vulnerability. So we did a lot of work thinking about how to reframe vulnerability away from just this kind of association with weakness as kind of a fundamental, ultimate like problem, you know, with vulnerability, because it's not like that in every field. So many of you will have read literature where vulnerability is like this openness, and it's a essential characteristic to have a relationship, to like build something together, to resist oppression. And so that's kind of the way we've been coming at this, re-theorizing of vulnerability, and also looking at the ethical issues around labeling people, because this is a big problem. You see it in, for instance, the work of Marina and Fass in anthropology, where they're talking about the vulnerability label. And so in some fields, you'll see a lot of conversation of this and the ethical issues with labeling, but often vulnerability is used without any consideration of any of that, right? And so that translates into like mapping, where oppressed people are often categorized just based on data and really dehumanizing maps, right? And so it translates into technical problems as well, that you have inaccurate representation of vulnerability. And then also securitization. We had this really cool interdisciplinary study where we looked at groups that are labeled as vulnerable for the purpose of exclusion and securitizing them. And we looked at securitization theory and the processes of kind of creating a category of people that are a threat because of their vulnerability. We looked at refugees and prisoners and people who are poor and other groups that are positioned as a threat to everybody else because of their vulnerability. So for me, all of this is, the more I go into theory, the more I kind of rethink things and look at the way we conceive of issues and some of the foundational theory of disasters, and the way we use language. I just try to encourage everybody to get ideological, get involved in theory, recognize that you have a position as a scholar to kind of do this and make people think, kind of reconsider things, make people self-reflect. And all of this it's important to build those relationships with people that you're writing about. Like that, the paper on telling stories of vulnerability, we have this huge data set of disaster scholars that write about vulnerable people, in inverted commas. And we just have this rich data set of all the ethical issues involved in like telling someone else's story about vulnerability, right? Okay, I'm gonna quick through these last couple. This is just, there's me with long hair and being a videographer. We did, yeah, I spent time in Vietnam doing filmmaking, done lots of more journalistic writing, which has been actually really healthy for my academic writing, because it makes you retrain yourself to get to the point and tell a story, where sometimes in our academic writing we're just kind of doing a report and it's not that interesting for people. So I'd encourage I do sometimes writing workshops for grad students at UF about how to write for the conversation or newspapers, and I think it's a really great thing to get into if you're a scientist. Disasters Deconstructed wanted to mention our podcasts. Well over 100 episodes now. It's used, I keep hearing of other people that use it in their curricula, which is cool. We go right from some episodes just on really, really basic disaster concepts through to very, very academic, like book reading and analysis of literature. But a lot of it's pretty lighthearted. And our season at the moment is actually about this book about thinkers that's coming out in the next year. So we're talking to some of the authors of the essays in our current season. We moved also into, and just to mention, like, meeting so many cool people that we interviewed through the podcast has been great as well. So, like, if you have a creative idea that does something different in your field, just go for it. Because this was just like a weird thing that we decided to do, and we've met a lot of cool people through the podcast. We also do live streams, like the current season of the podcast is all live stream on YouTube. And yeah, I've had lots of opportunities to facilitate thinking, discussion. As you can tell, I like to get people to think a bit differently about their work. Let's see. Yeah, that's just more, that was a cool article, actually. Barron's, like, the audience of Barron's, or the readership, is like absolutely not anybody that would ever look at my work. And that was just a cool opportunity to write for Barron's about Haiti with a colleague of mine from Haiti. And I wanted to finish by just mentioning NHERI. This is how I started working with Harmon, and on the policy group or committee at NHERI. But NHERI, I'm now the chair of the board of directors of NHERI for the next few years. And it was started as a way to get directors of centers and institutes of hazards and disasters around in North America together to discuss, their shared issues and ambitions and vision. And it's grown to have over 100 different member institutes. And now that we've transitioned into me being chair, one of my main focuses is to develop better communication about the network to everybody who's in those institutes, because it's been kind of this kind of closed network of directors in the past. And what we would love to see is that NHERI events become something that is shared with all the people that are in these institutes, especially emerging scholars, grad students, because that's the future of our field. And when I talk about all these theoretical change that's happening and new ideas coming out, it's generally not the directors of centers that are really on board, or like piloting these things or trying them out, trying the new theories out. It's folks who are emerging, who are trying new creative things. And so that's a big focus for me in building NHERI in the next few years. So we're starting a LinkedIn. I haven't started to promote that yet, but it's created. We're going to have a LinkedIn page, and we have also a few of our winners of our awards this year. I made videos and stuff at the Hazards Workshop, and we're going to be focusing videos of kind of spotlights on work of grad students that won our awards this year. All right, that's it from me, and I'm happy to ask questions, answer, or discuss anything that I've gone through.
Thank you so much, Jason. Feel free to ask questions in chat or unmute yourself, or we can also read off your questions if you put them in chat.
Sure, I have a question, Jason. What can we do in developing curriculum to address some of these sort of epistemological and ontological concerns that you mentioned about how we conceptualize disasters, where we are on that spectrum, from scientific realism all the way through post-positivism. What post-positivism? What do you think that, because you have here all of the people who are, presumably going into future academia and research, what can we do to help bring that discussion to the table?
Yeah, that's a great question, Holly. So, for me, I definitely think at grad school this is a great time to introduce these kind of discussions, new theory, um, challenge people to read. So personal experience, when I started my PhD, I had never read any research theory really. Kind of touched on it a little bit in my thesis. And then when I started PhD, it was like, here's some books about theory, but there was no classes or anybody to discuss with. And I was kind of trying to figure out some of these um, philosophical positions and framing for my dissertation. It was like mind-boggling, right? And so, like, I really think what we're doing at UF is a good model. So it's like the first class that PhD students take in our college, and they are going through week by week and in like reading groups through these texts, through different philosophical kind of themes, I suppose, like week by week, and having to read associated texts and then discussing it with each other and instructors, and then actually finding out how, like, where do they sit, like doing the assignments being associated with those things that they're reading, and like having to identify their own position and how that might change depending on their research question or whatever project they're involved with. And I think to me, that works really well at that level, like entry to a PhD program.
Thank you so much.
So one other thing, Holly, was I do think about this in relation to like classes I teach in undergrad. And we obviously have a lot of focus on us as being kind of politically active or agitating on campus in Florida. And the state is like really aware. Even the students now are super aware. And so it's like, I do think long and hard about how I present um, new concepts or ideas. And I definitely will see this issue and this is how other people see it and just open a discussion. So yeah, it's tricky because in my research, I don't really have any intervention or any kind of oversight of what I'm writing. I mean, the state doesn't really care, but they care very much about what is going on in the classroom. And they're actually kind of encouraging students to like record us and report us and stuff like that. So
I think there's a question in the chat that's kind of addressing what you're talking about from Puri. It says, thank you for the presentation. I have a quick question. In the current climate of, I think, politicians and politics in general, how do we need to raise concern with such a risk-taking and with decision makers? So I take that as, how do we navigate the current climate that's out there? You mentioned at the very beginning how when you talk to the press, it can be difficult. So for graduate students who have less power than you, how can you encourage them or ask them to walk through what that might look like for them?
um, so I, in well, one, I would say work in teams with uh, well, usually you'll naturally have different privileges and skills and resources in a lot of teams. Sometimes you'll end up in a team without people who have more privileges, and that can be tricky because you become an easy target of attack as that group. But like, for instance, in our work in Jacksonville, our team has like full professors in it. It also has, youth from the community who have had engagement with the Justice Department. And so we have like very different things that we can do and say, and privileges that we have. And so having an analysis of your team in terms of power and privileges, and making sure that the people like me, for instance, are the ones who are gonna like say the things that have to be said to UF or to, a mayor or whatever. Like, it's not gonna be somebody who's gonna have severe consequences or be like subject to some sort of retribution. So I think, yeah, I would say work in teams and just have that discussion about who's going to be in the best position to say something, not only to be taken seriously and heard, but also, with already has the most protection for what they're going to say, right?
Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to throw them in chat or unmute.
I have a very general question. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I just wanted to say, when you're talking about how research philosophy shapes our outcomes or our research, I wanted to know, are there like certain basic ideology that we could follow to get like you would recommend, like saying I do remember you saying you want us to go back to theory, so it is that only for social scientists, or if we're very corely technical, what would be a good like procedure or a philosophy we could adapt?
No, that's a great question. And so when we do doctoral core at UF, so this course I was talking about where we do core 1 on theory, we, like, I would say 70 to 80% of the students come in seeing themselves as very technical and like are asking questions like, what on earth are we reading, and so I would say if you were going to start with text, it's like core research paradigms texts that show you even where does a physicist get their theory from,
Okay.
whereas, and so it's going to be useful for you, even though if you read a paper from many sciences, there's no mention of theory or philosophy, right? It's
Yeah.
just methods.
Yeah.
But there's theory, right?
Yeah.
It's just not in the paper. And
Okay.
so finding out where your theory is coming from is important, even if you're in a very technical field.
Yeah.
And the huge benefit to being theoretically competent is that you're now going to be able to have great discussions with people that are not in your field, that have a different theoretical background than you do.
Yeah.
And you're going to be able to trace back to like, where do we diverge? And if you're in a team that you end up in a discussion about why is this the research question? Why are we using this sort of tool or method? Maybe you're going to be the person who can bring it back to some core philosophical differences because you now understand where the different research methods come from.
Okay. Yeah. So just an add on. So we would be more like being like following a methodology which is like kind of can be traced back to all disciplines. Could that
So
be
I
an
would say I
example?
would say a lot of scientific papers
Yeah.
just go straight into methodology,
Yeah.
thinking about theory, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that that methodology can't be traced back to theory. So it's like think about like where your starting point is for your work,
Yeah.
if you maybe you already have some, methodologies and methods that you're very familiar with that are like common, then start to think about where do they come from. If you read some of the texts about research theory, you'll be able to unpack that and trace it back. And if anybody has kind of questions about this, I'm happy to share some like syllabus from our theory course, which might be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
I think that's all the time we had for Q&A. But Jason, if you'd like to share the syllabus with me, I can make sure it gets distributed further. Yeah, that would be great. I would also be interested. But thank you again for your time, for speaking with us. I believe your email is already in chat, so would it be okay if folks reach out to you?
Yes, please. Happy to.
Okay, perfect. So if anyone has any other lingering questions, please reach out to Jason. But let's give him another round of applause for coming and thank you for chatting with us.